You think you've seen arrogance? Wait until you meet Leonardo Montalban, a billionaire who plays with human dignity like it's a game. If this story leaves you speechless, subscribe right now and hit like, because what happens next will make you question everything about power. Leonardo leaned back in his $20,000 Italian leather chair, legs crossed, eyes fixed on the skyline from the 47th floor. The city stretched beneath him like a conquered map. For years, magazines had called him a visionary. Universities begged him to lecture. Investors followed him like disciples. But none of that mattered to him. His true addiction wasn't money. It was humiliation, reducing others to silence, watching them tremble in his presence. That morning, he was bored, and when Leonardo was bored, the world suffered. "Bring me the translators," he ordered his assistant, voice sharp, cold. "Let's have some fun." Hours later, the best linguists in the country were seated at his glass conference table. Dr. Rivera, expert in dead languages. Professor Yamamoto, unmatched in Asian dialects. Youssef Karim, master of Arabic texts. Dr. Novak, a living legend in philology. Julian Morales, the media darling polyglot of the decade. Each one carried decades of study, honors, and respect. Each one looked uneasy in the presence of the man who believed himself untouchable. Leonardo stood, theatrically holding up a yellow document. "This," he declared, "is part of a family inheritance, written in a mixture of dead tongues. No one has managed to translate it. You have 1 hour. If you succeed, I will give you my entire fortune. $500 million, right here, right now." The room froze. No one laughed. No one moved. The offer was absurd, but his tone was deadly serious. "And if you fail," Leonardo continued, his lips curling into a cruel smile, "each of you will pay me $1 million for wasting my time. And you will publicly admit you were frauds." A murmur of disbelief spread among them. Eyes darted nervously. No one dared speak. "What's the matter?" he mocked. "The country's best linguists, paralyzed by a piece of paper?" And then the door opened, slowly, softly. Lucia Torres entered, pushing her cleaning cart. Blue uniform, calm face, eyes fixed on the floor. She had been cleaning these offices for 15 years, and her presence was usually invisible, as if she were part of the furniture. "Sorry, sir," she whispered. "I didn't know you were busy. I can come back later." Leonardo smirked. The timing was perfect for his twisted sense of humor. "No, no, stay. This will be entertaining. Gentlemen, may I introduce Lucia? She's been mopping these floors for over a decade. Lucia, tell them, what level of education do you have?" She hesitated. "I finished elementary school, sir." Leonardo clapped, slow, sarcastic. "Wonderful, marvelous. Well, Lucia, these 5 brilliant minds cannot translate a single line. Care to try?" The translators avoided her gaze. Some looked ashamed, others pitying. Everyone expected her to decline, to blush, to escape. But Lucia stepped forward. She picked up the document, held it gently, as though it were part of her, and read. At first, no one breathed. Her voice came low, steady, in Mandarin, not the modern version taught in universities, but the classical court language of the Tang dynasty, flawless and precise. Professor Yamamoto gasped. "Impossible! Her pronunciation is perfect." Lucia didn't stop. She shifted seamlessly into 7th century Arabic, her words flowing like ancient poetry. Youssef Karim pressed his hand to his chest, whispering a prayer. Then came Sanskrit, then ancient Hebrew, Persian, medieval Latin. Each tongue rolled from her mouth as if it were her own. She didn't stumble. She didn't translate. She remembered. The room was paralyzed. Dr. Rivera stepped closer, hypnotized. This is a miracle." And Leonardo Montalban, the man who never knew silence, suddenly had no words. His smile froze, his arrogance cracked. For the first time in his empire-built life, he was not in control. Lucia looked up, her eyes calm, unshaken. "Would you like me to translate the meaning, Mr. Montalban?" But he could not answer. Lucia's voice filled the room again, but this time she wasn't just reciting languages. She was translating. Word by word, phrase by phrase, she shaped the impossible text into Spanish so clear and precise it struck like lightning. "The true wise man does not sit on thrones," she read, "but in the corners where no one looks. He who believes he knows everything has already lost the sacred gift of listening, and he who humiliates others for their ignorance reveals only his own. Each sentence landed like a blade. Each word seemed designed for Leonardo Montalban himself. His arrogance, his cruelty, his pleasure in crushing others. It was all reflected in the ancient manuscript. He shifted in his chair, but for once his body didn't obey him. His fingers trembled. The translators stared in disbelief. Dr. Novak lowered herself into a chair, her eyes glistening. Professor Yamamoto pressed a hand to her mouth. Yusef Karim whispered a prayer, his voice breaking. None of them had ever seen such fluency, such authority. Where did you learn this? Dr. Rivera asked, stepping closer like a pilgrim approaching a shrine. Lucia's gaze was steady. In silence. While the world ignored me, the words silenced the room. For 15 years, she had been invisible, emptying trash cans, scrubbing marble, wiping down desks worth more than her yearly salary. And yet, in that moment, she held every eye, every breath, every ounce of power. Dr. Novak whispered, almost reverent. You are not a cleaner. Lucia lowered the document gently onto the table. For the last 15 years, I have been exactly what everyone assumed I was. Not because it was true, but because I needed to survive. Julian Morales, the young polyglot, leaned forward, his voice trembling. And before that, Lucia exhaled slowly, as if deciding whether to tear open a wound that had been bleeding for years. Before that, I was a professor, tenured at the University of Salamanca, 2 doctorates, comparative linguistics and ancient languages. I spoke 12 modern tongues, read 15 ancient ones. My research was cited worldwide. My name, once, meant something. The room was frozen. The mighty Leonardo Montalban, who spent fortunes to surround himself with brilliance, had for years walked past one of the brightest minds of her generation without even noticing. And then, Dr. Novak asked softly, Lucia's voice dropped. Then came betrayal, calculated, precise, cruel. The man I loved, my husband, also a professor, saw my success as his failure. He couldn't bear that students admired me more, that journals published my work before his. At first it was jokes, that I was ambitious, that I worked too hard. Then it was sabotage, altered files, forged emails, accusations of plagiarism so skillful, so methodical, no one doubted him. Her eyes darkened. They erased me, contracts canceled, grants withdrawn, colleagues stopped answering my messages. I was told the best thing was to let time pass. And time passed. But not for me. For me, doors closed one after another until there was only silence. Even the translators, hardened academics themselves, looked shaken. They knew how fragile reputations could be, how quickly institutions abandoned the fallen. And then, Lucia continued, I found out I was pregnant. My daughter was the only light in the darkness, so I left everything behind and came here, with nothing, no references, no credibility. The only work that asked no questions, demanded no past, was cleaning. Leonardo swallowed hard, his throat dry. 15 years. 15 years he had dismissed her as invisible, as lesser, while she carried a story heavier than any of his deals. Lucia looked directly at him. Her eyes weren't angry. They were calm, dangerous in their calmness. I didn't come here to expose you, Mr. Montalban, but you brought me to this table, and now silence is no longer an option. The document still lay on the table, glowing in the harsh light of the boardroom, but it was no longer the center of attention. Lucia was. For the first time in decades, Leonardo Montalban felt what it was like to be small, to be seen not as a giant, but as a man cornered by truth. He wanted to speak, to laugh, to retake control, but the words refused to come. The room had shifted, the balance of power had reversed, and everyone, from the eminent translators to the billionaire himself, knew it. No one moved, no one even breathed. The weight of Lucia's revelation hung over the room like a storm that had already broken. Leonardo Montalban, who built his empire on control, found himself stripped of every illusion. Julian Morales finally spoke, voice trembling. How could someone like you end up here? Lucia's expression didn't waver. She had waited years for that question. Because survival is not always about winning. Sometimes it's about hiding, about erasing yourself until the world forgets you exist. And when the world forgets, it's easier to start again, even if that means starting from the bottom. Her words cracked something inside the listeners. Professor Yamamoto began to cry silently. Dr. Rivera covered his face with one hand. Even the arrogant Morales lowered his head. They knew the academic world could be cruel, but none had imagined a fall this brutal, this absolute. Lucia continued, her voice low, deliberate. For 15 years, I carried this silence. I cleaned your desks, emptied your bins, scrubbed your floors. I listened to conversations you thought no one heard. Men boasting about ethics while manipulating numbers. Women discussing equality while ignoring those beneath them. I became invisible by necessity. And in that invisibility, I listened, I remembered, I survived. Her eyes fixed on Leonardo. Do you know why I never tried to tell my story before? Because men like you would never have listened. If I had told you a year ago that I was once a celebrated professor, you would have laughed. You would have mocked me, just like you mocked today's translators. Leonardo lowered his gaze. He could not deny it. He remembered how he once fired an employee for using the restroom too many times in a shift. At the time, he'd considered it efficiency. Now, hearing Lucia's truth, it sounded monstrous. Power, Lucia said softly, is not in wealth or thrones or applause. Power is in choosing to see the invisible, and you, she pointed at Leonardo, have spent your life refusing to see. The silence in the room was unbearable. Even the fluorescent hum seemed louder than usual. Dr. Novak, breaking the stillness, asked, "And your daughter? Does she know who you really are?" Lucia smiled faintly, though it was tinged with sorrow. She knows I studied. She knows I once taught. But she doesn't know the details. She doesn't know her father destroyed my career. She doesn't know her mother was once considered one of the brightest of her generation. She only knows I clean offices so she can have a future. The words struck like thunder. Leonardo pressed his palms against the table to steady himself. For the first time in decades, shame burned hotter than his pride. Lucia looked around at the stunned faces. And now, I ask you all something. What matters more, the titles on your walls or the truth you carry in silence? What defines you more, your successes or the way you survive when the world turns against you? Her eyes turned briefly toward the camera that recorded all of Montalban's games for his private amusement. And through that lens, it was as if she spoke directly to those who would one day hear this story. And what about you, watching this right now? If you saw someone crushed by injustice, erased by lies, would you stay silent, or would you stand up? Tell me in the comments, what would you do in Lucia's place? The translators sat in silence, visibly shaken. They had come expecting a humiliating spectacle, another cruel show of power. Instead, they had witnessed a woman rise from invisibility to strip a billionaire of every shield he had ever used. Leonardo opened his mouth, but no words came. For the first time in his life, he didn't know what to say. He only knew one thing. The empire he had built on fear and arrogance was cracking, and Lucia Torres was the one holding the hammer. Leonardo sat frozen, his empire of certainty collapsing under the weight of silence. He had always imagined himself untouchable, a god among mortals. Yet here was Lucia Torres, a woman in a cleaner's uniform, dismantling him without raising her voice. Finally, he forced himself to speak. "So, what do you want? Money, recognition, revenge?" Lucia's gaze didn't flicker. "I want nothing from you. I don't need your money, your pity, or your applause. What I want is for you to learn how to listen, to stop living in an echo chamber of your own arrogance and hear the people whose lives you step on every day." The words hit him harder than any insult. He had expected greed, perhaps demands, maybe even blackmail. But not this. Not a demand that he change himself. "You don't understand," Leonardo muttered. "People like me don't listen. We lead. We decide." Lucia leaned forward, her voice cutting through his defenses. "No. You dictate. You command. But you do not lead. A true leader listens to the lowest voice in the room, not just the loudest." For the first time, Leonardo noticed the faces of the translators. They weren't looking at him anymore. Their eyes were on Lucia, their respect shifting. He felt it like a blade twisting in his chest. the realization that in a single afternoon she had become what he had always pretended to be, a leader. The silence stretched until Leonardo spoke again, this time not with arrogance, but hesitation. "And how does one learn to listen?" Lucia folded her arms. "You start with those you ignore, the janitors, the drivers, the clerks, the ones who make your empire possible while you pretend they don't exist. Talk to them. Ask them about their lives, about the struggles you will never face. Don't lecture, listen, and then act." The simplicity of her command unsettled him. He had always imagined transformation as grand gestures, colossal deals, bold speeches. But she spoke of humility, of bending down instead of standing taller. Against every instinct, he nodded. "Fine, bring them in, the workers. I'll talk to them." Lucia shook her head. "Not here. Not in this palace of glass where they'll choke on fear. You will go to them, to their spaces, to their realities. If you want to understand, you cannot stay in your tower." For a man like Leonardo, stepping into the world of his employees was unthinkable. Yet something in her eyes left no room for mockery. He felt cornered not by force, but by truth. The next morning, Leonardo arrived at the company cafeteria, escorted by a nervous assistant. Word had spread quickly, and dozens of employees gathered, unsure if this was a trap. He scanned the room, suddenly aware of how alien it felt. The plastic chairs, the buzzing vending machines, the smell of reheated food. It was a world he had never touched. He stood before them, hands clasped awkwardly. For once, he did not know how to start. "Tell me," he said finally, "what it's like to work here." At first, silence. Workers exchanged wary glances. No one dared to speak. Then a woman in her 50s stepped forward. "You really want to know?" Leonardo nodded. She took a deep breath. "It's exhausting. Not just the work, the way we're treated. Like numbers. Like we don't matter. We get emails about family values. But when someone's child is sick, they're penalized for missing hours. We give everything, and it's never enough." Her voice cracked. "We're invisible to you, and it hurts." The words struck Leonardo harder than Lucia's translations. More voices followed. Stories of unpaid overtime, of fear of speaking out, of managers who mocked instead of supported. Each confession stripped away another layer of his illusions. Lucia stood in the back, arms crossed, watching him carefully. She wanted to see if he would dismiss them, laugh, defend himself. But Leonardo didn't. He listened. For once in his life, he truly listened. The session lasted hours. By the end, his head ached. Not from boredom, but from the weight of truths he had never allowed himself to hear. He walked out shaken, his steps unsteady. As he left, Lucia approached him. "Now you've heard their voices. What will you do with them?" Leonardo didn't answer immediately. For the first time, he had no ready speech, no rehearsed line. He simply looked at her, and for the first time in decades whispered, "I don't know." By the time Leonardo returned to the executive floor, word of his cafeteria experiment had already spread through the company like wildfire. Some employees whispered with cautious hope. Others shook their heads, convinced it was just another cruel performance. But the board of directors? They were furious. The emergency meeting began before Leonardo could even sit down. At the long mahogany table, 12 men and women, his so-called allies, were waiting with sharpened expressions. "Leonardo," barked Garcia, the CFO, "what on earth were you doing in the cafeteria yesterday? Do you realize what kind of precedent you've set? You gave those people the illusion that their complaints matter." A ripple of agreement circled the table. Another director added, "We have shareholders to satisfy, not sob stories to indulge." Leonardo remained standing, his hands on the chair, knuckles white. The old Leonardo would have laughed, mocked, crushed their arguments with wit and cruelty. But after hearing the cafeteria voices, after seeing the shame in Lucia's eyes, he couldn't. "They don't have illusions," he said slowly. "They have reality. And for the first time, I saw it." The room erupted, voices overlapping, accusations flying. "Populism! Dangerous weakness! You'll destroy the company!" Finally, Garcia slammed his fist on the table. "This cleaner, this woman, has filled your head with poison. You're letting a janitor dictate corporate policy. Lucia had been standing quietly near the door, invited by Leonardo despite their outrage. At Garcia's words, she stepped forward. Her presence was like a knife in silk, silent, sharp, undeniable. "Don't call me a janitor," she said evenly. "I have cleaned this building for 15 years with more dignity than any of you have ever shown. And if telling the truth is poison, then maybe this company needs to choke on it." The directors gasped, scandalized. But Leonardo's lips curved into something unfamiliar on his face. Not mockery, but respect. "You speak of shareholders," Lucia continued, "but shareholders only thrive when the foundation is stable. Right now, your foundation is rotting. Workers ignored, exploited, silenced. Productivity doesn't rise from fear, it collapses under it. You've built an empire of glass, and glass shatters." The silence was thick, broken only by the ticking clock on the wall. Finally, one director sneered. "And what would you propose? Raise wages, hand out gifts, play philanthropist while profits sink?" Lucia met his eyes without flinching. "Not gifts, justice, transparent wages, real benefits, a culture where people are valued instead of discarded. Do that, and you won't just keep your profits, you'll multiply them. Because loyalty cannot be bought with fear. It grows from respect." Her words hung heavy in the air. Some directors shifted uncomfortably, others glared, but all of them felt the weight of her conviction. Leonardo straightened, his decision forming as if forged in fire. "She's right. From this day forward, we change how we operate. We listen, we reform, and anyone who cannot stand behind this vision is free to step down." The explosion was immediate. Several directors stood, shouting, threats of resignation, of lawsuits, of financial ruin. Garcia leaned forward, eyes blazing. "You'll regret this, Leonardo. You're throwing away everything we built." But Leonardo's voice cut through the chaos, calm and sharp. "No, I'm saving it. For the first time in my life, I'm saving it." The boardroom became a battlefield that day. Arguments, ultimatums, even veiled blackmail filled the air. Yet through it all, Leonardo stood firm, with Lucia silently at his side. Her presence was both shield and sword. Every time his confidence faltered, he felt her gaze steadying him. By the end of the meeting, half the directors had stormed out in fury. The others remained, sullen but silent, knowing the tide had shifted. When the doors finally closed, Leonardo exhaled as if he had carried a mountain on his shoulders. He turned to Lucia. "You just declared war on them." She shook her head. "No, they declared war on you the moment you chose to listen. All I did was remind them of the truth." Leonardo studied her, his chest tight. For the first time, he realized he was no longer alone, not in battle, not in vision. And though the war ahead would be brutal, a strange new feeling stirred in him. Hope. The reforms began quietly, almost invisibly at first. A revised wage structure, overtime paid on time. New grievance channels opened, anonymous and direct. Small ripples, but within weeks, employees felt the difference. Productivity reports rose not by force, but by choice. People began to smile in hallways, greet each other with something other than exhaustion, but not everyone celebrated. In the shadows of the executive floor, the ousted directors plotted. Garcia, the furious CFO, met with two former allies at a private club downtown. Over cigars and whiskey, they whispered like conspirators in a dying empire. "He's lost his mind," Garcia hissed. "Listening to a cleaning woman, destroying decades of ruthless efficiency. If this continues, shareholders will revolt. We cannot allow him to drag us down with him." One of the men leaned forward. "Then what do you propose?" Garcia's eyes glinted cold. "We cut him out, quietly, before he buries us all, and we make her, this Lucia, a scapegoat, a fraud who manipulated him for her own gain." The plan formed like poison in the dark. Leaked rumors to the press, anonymous accusations of corruption, whispered doubts among investors. Step by step, they would isolate Leonardo until his empire collapsed under its own weight. Back in the headquarters, Leonardo noticed the resistance almost immediately. Certain contracts delayed, emails lost, sabotage disguised as incompetence, old allies avoiding his gaze in corridors. One evening, as he sat in his office, Lucia entered carrying a folder. She placed it on his desk without a word. Inside, copies of memos, doctored spreadsheets, leaked drafts of statements prepared for the media. "They're moving against you," she said calmly. Leonardo's jaw tightened. "I knew they wouldn't surrender easily. But this—" He tapped the forged documents. "This is war." Lucia nodded. "They'll try to paint me as the witch who bewitched you. It's predictable. But you cannot fight them with their weapons." "Then how?" he asked, frustration creeping into his voice. "They own the press. They own the whispers. They've played this game for decades." Lucia met his gaze, steady and unflinching. "Then we change the rules. Transparency. Bring everything into the open. Let the workers, the people, see what's happening. If they know the truth, the lies won't stick." It was a radical strategy, one no corporate empire had ever dared attempt, to strip away the walls of secrecy and show the public the gears of power, risky, dangerous. But Leonardo felt something shift inside him. The old version of himself would have scoffed. The new version, reborn in fire, recognized it as the only path forward. The next morning, he called a press conference. Cameras flashed, journalists murmured, investors held their breath. Leonardo stepped up to the podium with Lucia at his side. His voice, once dripping with arrogance, carried something new. "Wait. You've heard rumors," he began. "You've been told I've lost control, that I've been manipulated. Let me be clear. Those are lies. The truth is simpler. For years, I ignored the people who built this company. I believed power was measured in fear. I was wrong. Today, I stand before you not as a man who knows everything, but as a man who finally learned to listen." Gasps filled the room. Reporters leaned forward, pens flying. Investors exchanged frantic looks. "And if that means breaking with those who profited from silence, so be it," Leonardo continued. "We will build a new company, founded not on fear, but on respect. And if some call this weakness, I call it strength." The headlines exploded within hours. "Billionaire admits mistakes. Janitor inspires corporate revolution. Empire on the brink," or rebirth. But behind the applause came the counterstrike. Garcia's faction doubled their efforts, leaking personal details about Lucia, twisting her past into scandal. Anonymous articles claimed she had fabricated her credentials, that her story of betrayal was a lie. Leonardo slammed the papers onto his desk, rage boiling. "They won't stop until they destroy you." Lucia's voice was calm, though her eyes were tired. "They already destroyed me once. They can't do it twice. What matters is whether you let them destroy you." Her words pierced deeper than any attack. Leonardo realized then, this wasn't just about saving his empire. It was about proving that change was possible, that dignity could triumph over corruption. And for the first time, he wasn't fighting alone. The storm raged for weeks. Newspapers battled for dominance, some branding Leonardo a visionary reformer, others mocking him as a billionaire gone mad under the spell of a cleaner. Investors wavered, stock prices dipped and surged like a ship in a hurricane. Through it all, Leonardo and Lucia pressed forward, steady as iron. The reforms deepened, maternity leave expanded, safety measures enforced, promotions opened to those once ignored. Employees who had given up on fairness began to believe again. They worked with energy that surprised even themselves, their loyalty rekindled by something they had never expected from the empire of Montalban: respect. The board's resistance faltered under the weight of results. Productivity soared. Customer satisfaction rose. For the first time in decades, the company was spoken of not only as powerful, but as humane. Yet the war behind the scenes never ceased. Garcia and his allies still whispered, still schemed. And then came the gala. It was an annual spectacle, the company's crowning jewel, chandeliers glittering, champagne flowing, reporters crammed into corners to catch quotes worth printing. Leonardo had always ruled the gala like a king on his throne, issuing commands, granting smiles like royal favors. But this year, everything was different. When he stepped onto the stage, the room hushed, not because of fear, but because of curiosity. Everyone wanted to see if the rumors were true, if the cruel titan had truly changed. He looked out over the sea of tuxedos and sequined gowns. For once, his arrogance was gone. He adjusted the microphone, hands steady, eyes clear. "Tonight," he began, "I won't give you the usual speech about profits, growth, and dominance. You already know the numbers. What you don't know is the truth about how those numbers were built, on the backs of people we ignored. Murmurs spread, glasses froze midair, some directors stiffened. For years, I believed fear was the strongest tool in business, Leonardo continued. I believed silence meant respect. I was wrong. Silence means oppression. Fear breeds only resentment, and arrogance blinds us to the very voices that could guide us forward. He paused, scanning the crowd. This year, change began. Not because of me, but because of someone I had overlooked. Someone this company overlooked. A woman who was invisible for 15 years while carrying more brilliance than any of us in this room could imagine. Every head turned, following his gaze. At the side of the stage stood Lucia, her uniform replaced by a simple but elegant black dress. Her posture was calm, but her eyes betrayed unease at being exposed before hundreds. Leonardo's voice softened. Lucia Torres reminded me, and all of us, that leadership begins with listening. That dignity cannot be bought, only given. That respect is the foundation of true power. Tonight, if you celebrate anything, let it not be me. Celebrate her. The applause was hesitant at first. A few claps, polite but unsure. Then louder, stronger, until the hall thundered with ovation. Cameras flashed, reporters scrambled, pens raced. Lucia stood still, her face unreadable, but her eyes shimmered faintly in the light. Behind the applause, Garcia seethed, his jaw clenched tight. His last weapon was slipping from his grasp, the narrative. Every cheer, every flash of a camera, every headline that would follow turned Lucia from a target into a symbol. When the gala ended, Leonardo found her standing by the balcony, away from the noise. "You changed the company tonight," he said. Lucia shook her head. "No, they won't change because of me. They'll change because of you, if you keep listening." Her words struck him with humbling clarity. She didn't want glory, didn't crave revenge. She only wanted the truth to live. For the first time in his life, Leonardo felt free, not from responsibility, but from the chains of arrogance that had bound him for decades. He realized that humility, far from weakening him, had made him stronger, strong enough to face the enemies still lurking in the shadows. And as the city lights glittered below, Leonardo knew the war was not over. But for the first time, he believed it could be won. Months passed. The storm that had nearly consumed the company finally began to calm, leaving behind something no one expected. A new foundation. The reforms survived. Workers who once dragged themselves through the day now entered with purpose. Supervisors who had ruled with cruelty learned that listening was no longer optional. And slowly, even the skeptics on the board realized the truth. Dignity was profitable. But Leonardo knew the war wasn't only about profits, it was about legacy. And so, on a bright spring morning, he called a press conference unlike any other. Reporters filled the hall, cameras buzzing, anticipation thick in the air. When he walked on stage, Lucia was beside him. She no longer wore the uniform of invisibility. Her dress was simple, her posture steady, her presence undeniable. "Today," Leonardo began, "I announce the creation of the Torres Montalban Foundation. Its mission is simple, to protect those silenced by injustice, to give voice to those erased by power. For too long, I lived blind to their existence. Thanks to Lucia, I see now, and I intend never to look away again." Gasps rippled through the audience. Reporters scribbled furiously. Investors exchanged looks, uncertain but intrigued. Leonardo continued, his voice resonant with conviction. "This foundation will provide scholarships for those excluded, legal aid for those wronged, and opportunities for those ignored. Because true wealth is not measured by the money we hoard, but by the lives we restore." Applause erupted, filling the hall. But it wasn't the hollow applause of fear, nor the calculated clapping of sycophants. It was genuine, raw, a sound Leonardo had never known before. He turned to Lucia. "This is not my victory. It is yours." Lucia shook her head gently. "It belongs to everyone who was invisible, everyone who kept walking even when the world tried to erase them." In that moment, the cameras captured something no press release could fabricate. A billionaire and a former cleaner, standing side by side, united not by power, but by truth. That night, headlines spread worldwide. From janitor to justice, the woman who changed an empire, Montalban's redemption, the Torres Montalban Foundation, a new era. But beyond the headlines, something deeper stirred. Workers across the country, students, forgotten employees in forgotten offices, they saw Lucia and realized invisibility was not destiny. In his penthouse, overlooking the same skyline he once viewed like a conquered map, Leonardo stood silently. The city was still the same, but he was not. For the first time, the weight of his empire felt lighter. For the first time, he understood power not as domination, but as responsibility. Lucia joined him on the balcony, the wind brushing her hair. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. He smiled, faint but genuine. "No. For the first time in my life, I feel human." They stood together in silence, watching the lights flicker across the city, a quiet testament to the beginning of something larger than themselves. And now, to you who have followed this story to its end, what do you believe? Can one person truly change an entire system? Can the voice of someone invisible shatter the silence of power? Tell us in the comments. We want to hear your truth. And if this story left you thinking, subscribe, hit like, and share it, because sometimes all it takes is one voice to begin a revolution.